Just to start off, for you generally, when did your love of bluegrass begin to develop?
When I was in college in Boston, I'm the only member of this band who didn't go to school in North Carolina. All of my bandmates are based in the southern states here, southern states, North Carolina, and but at the same time that they were getting into bluegrass in college, I was getting into bluegrass in college, 900 miles away in Boston, Massachusetts. I went to Berklee College of Music for my undergrad, and that's really where I got into improvisation and learning to play jazz and other styles on the violin, making it more of a fiddle, as they call it, in this style. Um, so I learned fiddle styles, and bluegrass was just one of those styles that grabbed me when I first heard it, and I wish I were one of those people who that had grown up with it from a very early age. But I was probably 22 or 23 years old before I really heard bluegrass for the first time, and thought I was attracted most, I think, to the element of virtuosity um, that's involved. Being a classical violinist by training, um, playing stuff that's hard is always a challenge, and a challenge I enjoy. And so too was learning to play bluegrass music. It's not easy, and so I really enjoyed the challenge.
So your musical allegiances prior to joining the band or discovering bluegrass were very much in the classical vein?
It was. I'm sorry, I missed the last part.
What were your musical allegiances before you discovered bluegrass?
Um, well, I was as I said, a classical violinist by training, though I don't think I ever really expected to. Um, I, I probably could have pursued a career in classical music, but I somehow knew that I wasn't going to be a classical musician, that I was going to use my instrument in some other way, whether it was some other capacity, whether it was joining a rock band or maybe playing jazz, learning to play jazz on the violin, and it was really for me about finding my own personal direction in life. How here's this instrument that you've been playing now for 17 years, and you're about to graduate college. How are you going to use it professionally? And it was sort of a last-minute, split-second decision that I would become a bluegrass fiddler. And so I packed everything up in my car, drove 900 miles down to North Carolina, and joined the Sea Canyon Rangers in 2004. And the rest is history.
It sure is. So there was that school connection between the other guys in the band. How did
That's
you
right.
how
Three
did
of them, they... Go ahead.
how did you meet up with them initially?
Uh, Funny story. We found one another on the internet.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. Still in the fairly early days of Google.com. They were a group that had recently lost their fiddler. She had left the band to pursue a family life. I know that she got married, maybe went into the ministry, and was planned to have kids. And I found them. I was a fiddler that needed a band, and they were a band that needed a fiddler, and so we
Mm.
found one another through the internet. Nowadays, there's probably something more sophisticated like bluegrassmatch.com. No, that doesn't exist. But there could be such a service. Anyway,
Yeah.
I was just scouting the internet for scouring the internet for bands that I liked their sound and that might consider having me if I auditioned. So I approached them, and they gave me a job.
Wonderful. The band's music is faithful to the traditions of bluegrass, but by the same token, are you still forever conscious of keeping a modern day edge to the music and taking bluegrass to new places?
I think we do. We have to do that. We've always been a forward-looking band. I think because of the vast quantity of original music that that the songwriters in the band churn out. Graham Sharp, Charles Humphrey, actually all of us, but Graham and Charles, for the most part, have been our chief songwriters and have contributed the lion's share of the repertoire that we play. So while our style and our approach to the instruments is very traditional and harkens back to, maybe Mike's mandolin sounds like a Bill Monroe style mandolin, and Graham tends to play in a very, Scruggs style of banjo. Nonetheless, the Rangers have always performed original songs. So that is kind of a simultaneous throwback at the same time that I didn't mean to say throwback, excise that please. A simultaneous nod to the past as it is a ambition to create something new and something original.
I guess being a bluegrass band, I guess at times the temptation must be there to stick to focusing on traditional bluegrass material, but they, as you say, they've always focused on original material. Well, do you know if any stage there was a measured decision by the guys in the band to focus on the original songs, and that was going to be it for forever?
I think so. I'm pretty sure that the philosophy, if you will, if there was a philosophy, was that when Earl and Lester were singing their songs in the first generation of bluegrass, what we now consider to be classic songs that all bands play, well, they were brand new. They were originals to those guys.
Mm.
And we really, I think, always felt the need to do the same thing, to, express sentiments through the songs and through the standard types of, the content of bluegrass, which tends to be, I don't know, love, death, and trains. Sticking to that kind of, to those kinds of themes, but writing something that comes from within, has always sort of been the philosophy of the band.
Yeah.
In terms of songwriting.
Aside from yourselves, is there a particularly strong bluegrass scene there in North Carolina?
There's a huge one, and even more particularly in the western part of the state. It'll take you 7 hours to drive across the state of North Carolina, and we're in the probably almost the western edge of the state where the mountains are. For people who don't know much about the geography of North Carolina, the western third of the state is the Appalachian Mountains, as they snake all the way up to Canada. But they kind of start here just south of us in northern Georgia and move through western North Carolina, and that's the part that we live in. We are truly living in the mountains, playing mountain music.
The band recently celebrated its 10th year together. Now, you weren't there for the beginning, but it's probably about 2 or 3 years in when you joined. When you did join, did you envisage that was going to be something that you're going to be there for the long haul?
Yeah, I think I did. I knew that I knew that I had found something good right away, and by something good I mean a band that understood the style and were focused very much on the music. They weren't doing it because they were seeking fame and fortune. They weren't doing it because it was a great way of making money. Surely we all know that it's not, being a musician. They were doing it for the love of the music and for some, that kind of those intangible reasons that we decide to create art. Art for art's sake. And My job may have even been temporary status. I could have been even accepted into the band as a temporary fiddler for the first year, and something happened. I gained tenure, I guess you could say, and then I was welcomed to stay for the long haul, and I was very much willing to do so.
Mm. Yours is very much an American form of music. Whereabouts outside of the United States have you made your strongest inroads?
Well, in the beginning, it was Colorado. Right before I joined the band, about a year before I joined the band in 2004, no, maybe it was 2 years. The Sea Canyon Rangers, they won the big band competition out at Rocky Grass Festival. And Rocky Grass is in Lyons, Colorado. And they had already sort of built up a scene in the other big mountain range in the United States, that being the Rocky Mountains. There was a quote I heard recently, and I think it's very much true. Bluegrass is like American mountain jazz.
Mm.
I think those are three words that, if you put them together, can pretty much sum up bluegrass. It's American mountain jazz. At least the bluegrass that I listen to, it tends to bounce and swing. You know, it's very fanciful and full of life.
Yeah, I've never heard that description before, but it does fit. It fits beautifully.
And jazz really only, not because we're playing anything close to Charlie Parker and John Coltrane, but because improvisation is surely a very important part of the music. And
Yep.
so for that aspect alone, we can say that it might be a cousin to jazz, but it's American mountain jazz.
Yeah.
Um,
So talk about your stage show. Do you base it on the more traditional form of bluegrass presentation on stage, or is there a modern day edge to your live show?
I'm sorry, actually there's music playing now where I'm sitting, and it's very cold outside, so I'm sort of stuck here. Would you say that one more time?
Yeah, sure. Your live stage show, is it very much based on the traditional form of bluegrass presentation, or is there a modern day edge to the way you present yourselves on stage?
Oh, I think that our stage show is very much takes takes elements from maybe the way that the early radio shows in the 50s and 60s might have staged a show. The crowd around the mic style is very much what we base it on. Although we have expanded recently to using more microphones, just mainly to help everybody be heard. But there's still a lot of choreography, and we're constantly moving around, swapping positions on stage so that maybe one song Graham is playing banjo at the farthest mic, and then he comes around to the middle to sing a harmony, and then he goes back. And just that movement alone keeps, I think, the audience engaged in a visual way. It keeps the audience visually engaged.
Yeah.
And that's important, or an important part of our stage show.
Of course, you've gained a lot of notoriety in recent times with your collaboration with Steve Martin. Can you tell us how that whole thing initially came together?
Sure. Well, Steve Steve is, how did it start? We know the woman that married Steve Martin in 2007. We've known her for a long time. She's a close friend of the band. So basically, we know his wife. And they like to vacation in the mountains of western North Carolina, where we live. And we knew ahead of time that Ann and Steve were going to be at a private party. Woody and Mike knew this As a matter of fact, they were the ones that were first went to the party, and there was such a good probability that he might have his banjo with him that they brought their instruments. And I know that there was jamming immediately at the party, spontaneous jamming between a couple Rangers and Steve Martin, and that's sort of where the relationship began. Later, Steve started dropping in on our shows, and I remember in particular there was one show in New York City that we played at Joe's Pub, where Steve sat in on a couple songs, and then backstage we performed for him, or with him, several compositions that he had written and recorded on his first bluegrass CD called The Crow. And he may not have even known that we had gotten advanced copies of The Crow and learned all the songs to kind of be ready for that moment. But I suppose you could say that was our audition of sorts. And based on that jam that happened backstage and at Joe's Pub in New York City, I think Steve decided, maybe we should go on tour together. Maybe this could be a thing where, the six of us go out on the road and perform songs from this record that I've made, The Crow. And so taking that, we ran with it, performed, like 40 or 50 shows the first year with Steve across the U.S. And that was so successful, and I think really invigorated Steve that he wrote a whole slew of new compositions that needed to be recorded. When we were on the road on that first tour, he just kept churning out new music and saying, "Hey, what do you guys think of this? Hey, could this be a song? Could this be a song?" And the answer was always, "Yeah, that sounds great. What is that?" And he would say, "I just wrote it." And so it would become a song. And sometimes, I think towards the end of the tour, we were even performing, the new songs that weren't on The Crow. Those songs ultimately became, every single one of them practically became the music that you hear on Rare Bird Alert.
Yeah.
So the second CD came out of the tour for the first CD, if that makes sense.
So the whole experience with Steve, has it exceeded your expectations of how much it would expose bluegrass and your band to a wider audience?
Oh, completely exceeded. I don't think that there can be any better exposure for a bluegrass band than the exposure that we had on the 4th of July for America's birthday. Live on the Capitol lawn in Washington, D.C. was just about one of the most exciting moments of our career. I think with 500,000 people in attendance on the mall there in Washington, and then another, I believe it was estimated to be more than 10 million viewers at home and abroad. I think troops in Afghanistan were even watching. So it was just a huge audience for bluegrass, a huge audience for us, for Steve Martin, and it may never get better than that.
That's true.
But we've had the great fortune to be on television about 8 times this year with Steve Martin, and yeah, it's done wonderful things for the music. I think people are seeing bluegrass at the show and at the live show and on TV sometimes for the first time, or maybe seeing Steve play banjo for the first time. People are still asking the question, "Oh, really? He plays banjo? I might like to see that." And then they go and see it, and the next thing you know, they're a fan of traditional music, and
That's
they didn't
right.
know it
Yeah.
until that moment. So we're always happy if somebody who doesn't listen to bluegrass buys a CD at a Steve Martin show, and that becomes their first bluegrass record. We feel like we've done our job.
Yeah, that can only be a good thing. Scanning a few articles in preparation for this interview, I noticed a few of them describing you as just Steve Martin's backing band. Is there a little bit of worry there that you might lose a little sense of your own identity as a working band in your own right?
Um, you know, to be honest, I haven't worried about that at all. I don't think any of us have been worried because those types of those those words, and I've seen them written. I know what you're speaking of. Have been few and far between.
Mm.
Most of the reviewers that I have, most of the reviews I've read, either of live shows or of the CD, have made it clear that there are two musical forces or two groups joining here. Basically, the group known as Deep Canyon Rangers and the brain of Steve Martin. And the fingers, the talented fingers of Steve Martin. His compositions and his prowess on the banjo, combined with our performance techniques, is really what you get when you see the sextet perform live. And I think most people who've seen the show and most of the reviewers have been in touch with that, have known that we are a separate entity and have credited us as such.
Talking about the songwriting and the creative process within the band, does it vary from song to song?
Um, the creative process tends to be the same for vocals, for vocal tunes. I think more so for vocal tunes than instrumentals. An instrumental tends to come to the table and not change very much. It just sort of it's usually brought forward by the instrumentalist that wrote it, and it pretty much sounds like it sounded when they wrote it. A vocal tune, though, tends to follow a different formula, but it's always usually the same formula. And what I mean by that is not formula. I mean protocol. The songwriter will bring the song to the band, and it really breathes and develops with the group. And the arrangement is not always certain at first, and we learn to arrange it together. And everything from, chord suggestions to lyric suggestions are all considered and thought about as a group.
You play a lot of festivals, which must be a great environment to work in for a band like yourselves. Is it still the best situation for a band like the Steep Canyon Rangers to introduce themselves to new audiences? That festival situation?
At festivals, well,
Yeah.
to be honest, I think that the tour with Steve and the continuing tour, I should say, because we've got another 40 shows planned for 2012 along with Steve Martin. Those have really done the most, I want to say, to introduce us to new fans, because most of the people on the festival circuit have at least heard us before.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that we don't encounter new people at festivals. We certainly do, and we make new friends, and that's always a good thing. I think we probably prefer festivals, even in terms of how much fun it is to play outdoors and to play in the kinds of to play some of the festival stages that we played recently, like Bonnaroo and the New Orleans Jazz Festival and Merle Fest. Those three in particular stick in my mind as outdoor festivals that are thrilling to be a part of and to be up on that stage. But as far as meeting new fans, the Steve Martin Show has really, I think, been the biggest catalyst in that happening, only because so many people are probably coming to see Steve because he's a movie star, and walking away as a newfound bluegrass fan is just a happy byproduct of that experience. And so, yeah, that's my answer.
What about younger fans of bluegrass? Have you noticed in your travels a new generation of bluegrass fans coming through?
Yeah, there is a new generation, and it seems to be really strong, particularly in places like Colorado, the Pacific Northwest, Washington and Oregon State. California, but also too in places like um, North Carolina, which you think would be a given, because the music is very much from this part of the country.
Mm.
You know, Kentucky and North Carolina and Georgia, Tennessee are huge states for bluegrass. So we play in a variety of different venues. When we're not playing a festival, we might be in a concert hall, but we might also be in a rock and roll club. Actually, like the one we're playing tonight. It's called the Blind Tiger in Greensboro. It's where I'm sitting talking to you right now. And we're about to play a show probably for a much younger crowd than we would play at say a bluegrass festival in Kentucky.
Fantastic. And Nicky, just before I let you go, upcoming plans. We know you've got some more shows coming up with Steve shortly, but what else can we expect from the band in the near future?
I meant to ask you if if Australian TV is privy to the Jimmy Fallon show. Do you have Jimmy Fallon
Yes,
in
we do.
Australia?
Yes, we do. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Then I should mention, if this is written in time, that we'll be on the Jimmy Fallon show with Steve Martin on December 5th.
December 5. Wonderful.
12/5.
We'll
Yeah.
look at-
That's probably our last appearance of the year with Steve. And next year we'll probably start as early as March or April when we start, performing the big performing arts centers again. And what else? We've just completed a new CD by ourselves. It's the first, solo Steep Canyon Rangers record since Rare Bird Alert. It's all the tracks have been recorded. They're just being mixed and mastered, and all the art design is being figured out as we speak.
Fantastic. So plenty to look forward
that should
to.
be due out in March of 2012.
Wonderful. Hey, Nicky, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for stepping in at the last minute to take this call.
Oh, no problem. Yeah.
No-
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for calling.
Best of luck with your show there tonight, and with or without Steve, we'd love to see you all down in Australia. But
We would love to visit Australia. It would definitely be a treat if that could ever happen.
well, we've got a fantastic festival season down here where you would just slot in beautifully, and we'd love to see you.
Well, I can't wait.
Let's hope it happens. Thanks again, Nicky. I'll let you get ready for your gig. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye-bye.